Letty Cottin Pogrebin is a writer, author, and founding editor of Ms. Magazine and has served as Moment columnist since 1991. She has published 11 books, including the Jewish feminist classic Deborah, Golda, and Me, and is presently working on Shonda, a memoir of shame and secrecy. Letty's articles and op-eds have appeared in dozens of periodicals, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and The Nation. She's a co-founder of the National Women's Political Caucus, the Ms. Foundation for Women, the UJA Federation Task Force on Women, and the International Center for Peace in the Middle East. Letty's honors include a Yale University Poynter Fellowship in Journalism, an Emmy Award for Free to Be You and Me, where she served as consulting editor, and inclusion in Who's Who in America. Joining Letty today is Amy E. Schwartz, Moment's opinion and book editor since 2011. Amy is the editor of the forthcoming book, Can Robots Be Jewish? And Other Pressing Questions of Modern Life, a volume of questions and answers drawn from Moment's popular Ask the Rabbis feature. Prior to Moment, Amy spent 17 years as an editorial writer and weekly op-ed columnist at the Washington Post, specializing in education, science, and the culture wars. She has lived in and reported from around the world and was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in commentary in 1988. Amy is currently president of the Jewish Studies Center, an independent adult education institution in Washington, D.C. Please welcome Letty and Amy.
Hi there. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you all with us today. So Letty, I have to say at the outset, when I first came on as opinion editor of Moment and started editing your column, I found you extremely intimidating.
Oh, no.
Well, you'd been a columnist for Moment for a really long time, and you were this big feminist heroine. I'm
blushing. You can't be blushing on Zoom.
There you go. Well, over that's why we're backlit, right? So we can blush. So, and it's just been such a pleasure all these years editing your column and getting to know you properly.
Well, I have to say, Amy, I feel as if our editing process is one of the intellectual delights of my life.
Oh, thank you. Me too. So there are a million things I'd like to ask you about in this conversation, but let's start where I started, with the feminist history. So you've been active in feminist causes ever since you co-founded Ms. Magazine with Gloria Steinem in the 70s. And you drew on that history in that column you wrote recently, criticizing the Hulu series Mrs. America for its portrayal of what happened in those years. So I have two questions, actually. First of all, what should viewers, like our viewers of this talk, know about what really happened back then that they don't know? And secondly, if you can throw your mind back there, what would have surprised you all the most back then if you could look forward and see where women are today?
I'm going to answer the second question first. It would have surprised me. I've been a feminist for 50 years. This is my 50th anniversary of consciousness-raised kind of feminism. And a lot of women try to kind of say, well, I've been a feminist all my life. But, I think we don't realize the refinements of feminism. I thought I was because, I was an executive in book publishing before I ever became a writer. How could I complain? And then I realized I was blind to the condition of other women. I was really so blinded about my own life, my own struggle, the fact that I could get, maternity leave, not that anyone else could, or that it was going to happen after I left my company, that sort of thing. There were little blind spots along the way that once you kind of get the click, you realize, you have to go back and reconsider your entire life, starting with your birth and your relationship with your parents and how you were toilet trained. But the thing that would have surprised me most is that we weren't done yet, that we're not done yet 50 years later, that we're backsliding in many areas, that we have to convince a new generation every maybe 20 years or 15 years that we need a struggle, we need an organized struggle, we need a movement. And it's not enough to just be a feminist for yourself. It's not enough just to say, I have great childcare, so childcare is not my issue. And I really thought that we would be done. You know, we started Ms. in 72. I thought by 77 we'd be done. And everybody would have had their epiphanic moment, and everybody would have confronted their husbands for leaving their socks on the floor, and everybody would have decided, you know, I'm going to raise my boys and girls with open opportunities the way Free to Be You and Me suggests that we do. And that didn't happen. I mean, it happened in bursts and in, you know, fireworks for some women. And for some women, it took getting hit with the fact that your coworker who had a lesser education and less experience was being paid, you know, twice as much as you were, something like that. Or it took an example of sexual harassment in your life or the life of some woman you knew closely for you to say, wait a minute, you know, this has to change. It's not all, we're not done yet. The first question, tell me the first question again.
Oh, just about what we should know that we don't know about what happened, what really happened.
Oh, what really happened, what really happened, yes. Well, my experience of becoming a feminist was, as I said, because I was coming out of the executive suite in book publishing, I needed to have that somebody hammer me over the head. And what happened was I was going to publish my first book, How to Make It in a Man's World, in 1970, in which I described my career. My career was quite exciting. I had all sorts of famous authors. I had President Harry S. Truman. I had the Marx Brothers, Groucho and Harpo. I had Jackie Suzanne, who was the best-selling author of Valley of the Dolls, and I had Helen Gurley Brown, who was the author of Sex.
You were Jackie Suzanne's editor? That's funny. Okay, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was publicist for these people.
Okay, go on.
So I was the one who was, you know, teaching them how to go on and sending them around the country and dealing with, you know, op-ed page editors and book review editors and booking agents and all of the talk shows and all of that. So I really didn't feel I needed what was then called women's lib.
Uh-oh, we froze.
And yeah, maybe, you know, I'm a woman, and because lives to the status of women who aren't in your class and in your occupational realm. And I said, well, what do I do about this? How do I prepare to go on talk shows with people who are going to attack me for this completely innocuous memoir about my life in publishing? She said, and she gave me the manuscript of a book called Sexual Politics by Kate Millett. She gave me a folder full of articles on the myth of the vaginal orgasm. That was a mind blower. Or I Want a Wife, another classic early theory paper that was spelling out a theoretical framework for feminism. Each of these, and the statistics on women on welfare, and the statistics on the differential between men's and women's salaries, and the fact of all the stories that I read about violence against women, my world expanded exponentially thanks to this editor giving me a course. So I read my way into feminism, which is one way that it happened to us. Other ways where, you know, your husband beat you and you had to leave the house, or your father treated you as if you weren't worth, you know, investing in your education, or any number of things that are sort of what Jane O'Reilly called the clique that made you a feminist. So when we started Ms. in 1972, there were 5 of us, and almost immediately after that, 6 of us. And we thought the first issue was going to be the only issue, because what we were trying to do was to popularize what had become a kind of rarefied, inside the beltway kind of, you know, feminists talking only to each other. And we wanted to reach a larger audience, a general audience. We thought maybe we'd sell well in the college towns and in the big cities. And we had to get everything into the first issue. So we had an article on, you know, how to make a marriage contract, and let the hair on your legs grow if you feel like it, and how to start a consciousness raising group. I wrote a piece called Down with Sexist Upbringing, because I had little kids. I've always written about the parts of my life that, you know, befuddle me or puzzle me or challenge me. And raising kids at that point, my kids were, I think, 5 and 2 years old. So that's what I wrote about, non-sexist child rearing, which I worked very hard to change the toy shelf in my kids' room and, you know, the books that they had on their shelves. And I wrote about that. And I did a lot of research to find stuff that people could use if they wanted to raise children to be equal human beings. And it was so jam-packed that I had a moment, I remember, when I said, if we are ever going to become an actual monthly magazine, what will there be left to say? We've said it all. We've covered race and class and gender in every possible way. And the magazine, which was supposed to last for 8 weeks as a kind of sample of what we could do, was called the preview issue. It was published in January of 1972. Sold out in 8 days, and it sold out all over the country, in tiny little towns in North Dakota, you know, in far off rural places in Maine. So we realized we were on something. And when I say we sold out 250,000 copies, which was, we thought, you know, it would be on newsstands. Remember newsstands? For ages, for 8 weeks, and it was gone. And so we immediately started working on what was to be the July issue, the one with Wonder Woman on the cover. And that beginning, just to give you, and then I'll stop, a sort of atmospheric sense, anything was possible because everyone was paying attention to us. For example, there were 7 newspapers in New York, and they all did major stories on us. We were on Walter Cronkite. He famously said, ladies, I don't think you're going to last, you know. And then he had to eat crow when we were there, like 5 years later, 10 years later. But he did admit he was wrong. But it was very heady because we could feel our impact. Suddenly we're writing about abortion, everyone's having abortion, speak out, some legislators are suddenly passing bills. We felt we had affect. There were not, you know, 1,800 possible other things you could be watching. So after women were tired of reading Good Housekeeping, McCall's Ladies' Home Journal, and Red Book, there was Ms. Oh my God, we looked kind of glossy and shiny, and we had advertising in the early days. It was very hard to sell advertising because people thought, you know, all feminists were, and then you name anything horrible and we were it, including wearing combat boots and hating families and all of that. And so I can only say that even though there were brickbats thrown and we were vilified by some, the fact that we made impact so fast in terms of attention must be paid, made it feel as if all the labor was worth it. All the sort of 20-hour days that you know perfectly well when you're closing a magazine. You don't sleep, you don't eat. It was all worth it. So it was a marvelous time, and that's why I thought we were going to accomplish everything by 1977.
So you go from thinking that it's never going to work and no one will care to thinking, well, why didn't everyone see this all along?
Right.
Right.
And once we show them, and once we remind them, once we explain it, everyone will say, yeah, I'm in.
Oh, well, doesn't work out that way, right? Right. So actually, I want to pursue that theme a little more. As you say, you're a memoirist, among other things, and a lot of your writing is drawn directly from your life, and a lot of your columns, many of my favorite of your columns, are drawn from your memories. And two of the ones that really stand out in my mind are, there's one that was called, I think we called it Two Bat Mitzvahs 60 Years Apart, which was the contrast between your oldest granddaughter getting a bat mitzvah and
it was my niece.
Your niece, okay, Maya, right?
No, this is my niece Amy in Colorado.
I just reread this column, and I think it was about your granddaughter.
Oh, maybe I must have written about that, because I wrote about my niece first, and that was a column I think way back.
Yeah, before my time, I think. Before
your time, when I spoke only about dredging up, because it took a lot of work. The history, I didn't know about in Jewish tradition. And at my niece's bat mitzvah, that's what I did. Okay, then go to the Maya one. That's my oldest granddaughter, right?
So the one I'm thinking about was about just the contrast. You talked about hers, which was, wonderful, and, celebrated her both ritually and personally, and she spoke and she taught the congregation, and the rabbi was a young woman who had worked with her. And then you flashed back to your bat mitzvah in the 50s, and the tall silk kaftan.
My Rebbe. Yeah, I guess I should, since it sounds like the era of the dinosaurs, I should say that when I was bat mitzvah in 1952, first thing I remember is my mother let me wear black for the first time in my life, because my mother was a shtetl immigrant, and black you didn't put on children, just like children didn't go to yeshiva, and children didn't go to funerals, and children didn't go to shivas. Children didn't wear black, but my friends were wearing black to evenings, and so I talked her into a black velvet dress with a little white lace collar. So that's the first thing I remember. The second is the rabbi's tall silk crown yarmulke. The third thing is I was not allowed to read from the Torah. It was Friday night. My entire bat mitzvah celebration was an Oneg Shabbat with sponge cake and Manischewitz wine. That was it. Meanwhile, all the boys I knew had Saturday. They read from the Torah. They were given tali tot. They were given, wine, Kiddush cups, and they had these humongous parties in hotels and catering halls. So that, the fish doesn't know it's in water. And basically I didn't know I was in sexist, swimming and drowning in sexism. I was 12 and a half. My parsha, my reading from Nevi'im, from prophets, was the Song of Deborah. Looking back, that became like God saying in her wisdom, take this as a symbol of your future. Because Deborah was a prophet. She was a leader. She presided over, I think, 40 years of peace. She sat under her palm tree and dispensed wisdom, which is not to say I do, but I write. So there was in Deborah a kind of what, novelists call foreshadowing, but I didn't notice it, only in retrospect.
Well, you end the column by saying that actually when you looked back at the program all these years later, you saw that the topic of the rabbi's sermon was something about the status of the Jewish woman or something like that. And you said you didn't remember a single thing about what he had said, but you like to think that he would have been pleased at what was happening now. And the reason I set the question up this way is, what struck me was how, as you say, you didn't mind the water. I mean, you didn't see him as the enemy. It was a positive experience, and all this that's happened has been, there's been a lot of happy progress in Judaism. I wanted to draw you either a parallel or a contrast, depending how you want to look at it. Another column that you wrote that's from probably not, maybe it's probably, I'm trying to think, it's probably 7 or 8 years later, where you write about being a college student, and when you discover you're pregnant, your initial plan is to jump off the Triborough Bridge, because you can't see any other way forward.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that too was a column about sort of the difference between then and now. But I wonder if you want to talk about these two narratives, feminism inside of Judaism versus outside of Judaism. Are they, do you feel like those stories have
That's a very good segue, Amy. Thank you. That is a very good segue. I was a secular feminist first because I was in rebellion from Judaism based on something which I wrote about in Deborah Gold and Me, and therefore if people have read that, I'm sorry for the repetition. But after being very well educated, quote, for a girl in Judaism, because I was my father's third daughter, and he was going to pour everything he knew into me. he was a lawyer, but he also was a Hebrew teacher, a teacher of bar mitzvah boys when he was young, and he studied Talmud his whole life, and he was a Baal Koreh. He read Torah beautifully, I might say, and he had nobody to put all of that passion, commitment, learning. So I got it as much as a girl could, and I went to Hebrew school, Hebrew high school. I went to the Yeshiva of Central Queens for 2 years. And, you know, when I was not allowed to say the Kaddish at my mother's, at the Shiva after my mother died when I was 15, mind you, I had this bat mitzvah, I graduated from Hebrew high school, all of that, and I didn't qualify. Well, I knew perfectly well that I didn't qualify, but my father was in charge, and he could have entitled me the way he entitled himself to smoke secretly on Shabbat, and the way he entitled himself to drive secretly on Shabbat. Drive to shul, park 3 blocks away, and walk there as if he had just, you know, toddled the whole 1.5 miles from our house. So I thought, he cut corners on Judaism. Why not let me count in the minyan? Which, for those who are watching don't know, in those years, women simply didn't count in the minyan. Women didn't have aliyot to come up and do the Torah blessings. I mean, it was just a very bifurcated gender ghetto world. And when I was refused that right by my own father, who had been my tutor, and I was the daughter of this person, he was excluding me from the comforts of my own faith, I left Judaism. So I left Judaism at 15. And when I say I was a secular feminist, it means that had become my religion, feminism. It was years later, but say 10 years later or 15 years later, but it took the place of the passion that I had as a very pious little girl. I was a very good Jewish girl. And had I not been excluded, had I been a boy, I even would have liked to be a rabbi. So just put that aside. So feminism is my faith after that, okay? And for me to discover Jewish feminism after feminism, you know, what I think of as secular feminism, was such a marvelous melding for me. It was a return. It was a tshuva to something that allowed me to braid together 2 of my, you know, my deepest commitments. And Jewish feminism, which we can talk more about Jewish feminism, has a remarkable leg up on secular feminism in that you can't take back what Jewish feminism has accomplished. You can take back abortion rights. You can take back Roe v. Wade. You can change the definition of sexual harassment, as Betsy DeVos would like to do, let's say, on campus. But you can't take back ordained women. You can't take back women who study and now know Gemara as well as men. You can't undo, you can't unlearn, you can't unexpose what's actually been accomplished in Jewish feminism. So I celebrate us for that and struggle with the secular where we keep sliding downhill and have to fight our way back up.
That's interesting. So really, in some ways, it is a more straightforward story.
It's a more linear story.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
We have to learn to live with the dialectic in secular feminism, and it's nice, neat, and linear to use, you know, like Michael Walzer's construct in Exodus and Revolution, where actually things change and get better, actually.
Right, not just a cycle, but actually a forward.
It keeps recycling the same old.
That is very interesting. So yeah, well, this is sort of another way of getting at the same thing. I'm going to take you back to secular feminism a little bit. I apologize. So like, if you look at the moment we're in, not the magazine, just the cultural moment. Sorry, I go to a lot of trouble to avoid that sentence construction since I've been at Moment, but what can you do? So at this cultural moment, it seems like really the dominant discussion is race. And, you know, right now, everything is being talked about in terms of race. And I think you're seeing a little bit of that click kind of moment where a lot of people there's this feeling that everything's up for rethinking and reflection, and a lot of people are seeing things that maybe they never saw before, or you're looking for them in places you never looked for them before. Well, maybe that seemed normal to me, but maybe that was just racist, that kind of thing. But if you think back, not even that long, maybe, I don't know if it was 1 year or maybe it's 2 years, there was that same feeling around the Me Too movement. There was a big burst of energy, and it seemed as if all sorts of things were being looked at sort of with new eyes. And, it seemed like new things were actually happening. So I wonder, like, from where you sit, where did that energy all go? Did it just dissipate, or has there been?
Not at all. I mean, I think Me Too has left an indelible mark. My husband's a labor law, and the employment manuals that have been produced by employers all over this country, which sort of had boilerplate, flat language discussion of sexual harassment, are now very clear about how the company's liability, it runs in the multi-millions, and you're not gonna touch this woman's shoulders to give her a massage. They're very specific. And the call-out culture has allowed men to really suffer, which, you can argue about that. And we are in a current moment also where we're arguing about cancel culture. But I think it's a rare man now who's at least woke in the slightest possible way, who doesn't know that you don't do that. You don't comment on, your breasts look great in that blouse. You just don't do that anymore. And also, I think the fact that Jewish men, I'm talking now about our community, that Jewish men have been embarrassed by, and I mean that there's a Shonda factor here, that we have so many incredibly gifted, brilliant Jewish men who have nonetheless treated women like jerks, and like they were, objects for their pleasure and delight in the workplace. And that has, I think, the shame factor in Jewish life has really been very powerful. And the visibility of some of the men who, I'm not going to say their names because I don't think they have to suffer, 100 times over. They've suffered. And many of them, I think, have had a really economic as well as a moral awakening, But I don't think Me Too, just because we're not hearing about it, and I don't think that you can say that one movement displaces another. They can be happening at the same time. I happen to remember when Roots was on TV. I don't know if you remember Roots, where Kunta Kinte, the baby, was held up, and it was just a glorious, painful story about slavery in America. And then a couple of years later, the Holocaust went on television. And I was in a Black Jewish dialogue group that lasted for 10 years. And the women in that group said, we're experiencing this as displacement. We're experiencing this as blotting out the impact of Roots by displacing us with your worst story, or at least it's presented as the ultimate worst, and we were just really bad. So I don't think we can let that happen. I don't think we can allow the zeitgeist to believe you can only hold one idea in your mind at the same time. And I think also intersectionality is a very slippery word, but I think that they fit together because different forms of oppression very often reach the same end, and that is you don't feel fully human, or you're sacrificed for another goal, or you're mistreated by an entire class of people. So that there is a kind of structural comparableness that allows us to work on both of those wrongs at the same time.
Yeah, that's very wise. I appreciate that because I think a lot of what this idea that only one story is a story at the same time is really an artifact of journalism,
and it's also an artifact of, let's face it, anything to shut us down. So, okay, if you can shut down feminism by forefronting racism, bring it on, because we're dealing with power that must be taken. It's never going to be given. Power is not given. It has to be taken. So all this is happening at the same time, where power is being siphoned off from those who've had it historically for centuries and millennia. And we can't allow those who've had it to deflect us by saying, you know, I don't want to hear about you. We're working on racism now. To hear white men and black men say that would really piss off all women of all colors, because, you know, that's what happened during suffrage. There was tremendous, rightfully so, concentration on slavery, and that displaced women's call for voting rights. It was like, we can't deal with you right now. This is the primary, this is our cause for people of conscience. So suffrage took the place of, suffrage was sidelined, and racism came to the fore, and we can't let that happen again. We have to be able to walk and chew gum.
Mm-hmm. There was and I think sometimes it happened the other way too. At certain times during the civil rights movement, there were times when people said, you can't focus on women's rights right now. This is more urgent.
Exactly. It's just yet another mirroring of it. That's what happened with when Off Our Backs, excuse me, which was a publication at that time, I think it was, or whatever it was, Robin Morgan was the person who wrote something like Goodbye to All That, which was, all that meant serving coffee to men in the revolution. Right. Their laundry in the revolution. That yes, it's a very important revolution, but we're going to have to be on the front lines together. We're not going to be serving you guys who are on the front lines.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned call-out culture, and I'm going to use that as a segue to talk maybe a little bit about the broader culture. And I guess the thing I always want to ask of someone with some historical depth of perception is, you know, is it always this bad in the Jewish community? Is it always a uniquely contentious moment, or does it always feel like this?
Well, I always, if you remember Label Fine, who was your original editor way back when, as a matter of fact, the first piece I ever wrote for Moment was, I think, in 1976, when Label found out that I was the Rabbanut, I was the Chazanut of the Saltaire congregation in Fire Island, because none of the men knew how to daven with melody. So I had grown up. My father was president of the shul, and I sat on the bima on his lap, and all these melodies just seeped into me, and so I could do Avinu Malkeinu in 2 seconds. And so I became the Chazanut, I don't know if somebody.
In other words, you led the prayers. In other words,
I led the prayers. I became the cantor of this ad hoc little congregation in Fire Island. Sorry. Let me just turn that right off. So sorry.
I'm able to mute these things. I've been trying.
And Label Fine, who was the editor, the founding editor with Elie Wiesel, said, I heard about this, write about it. And so I wrote a piece called Barefoot and Shoe, because we never wore shoes in Fire Island. And you would have these people dressed very nicely, but barefoot, coming to services. And we ended up where the Protestant church donated their space, and we had our services every year. And I did the service, the High Holy Day services, for 13 years. That I consider my second bat mitzvah, because it allowed me to return to Judaism, because it made me question, why was this my father's faith? Why did I have to succumb to that second-class status to which he had assigned me? Educate her, then don't let her do it, you know? And because I did it, and I was able to do it, and the community didn't have anybody else to do it, I felt somehow or other re-enveloped into Judaism. allowed to be a Jew in the way I had been raised to be, really. So I wrote about that. In any case, Label Fine said to me a long time ago, God,
We were talking about whether it was contentious.
I just blocked it after going off on that detour.
Well, we were talking about whether things were more contentious now or whether it always.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So Label said, and he started to give me a history of from Rashi, from Hillel and Shammai on, about how we've been contentious. And the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim and the this and the that. And he said, it will always be this way. It always was, and it will always be. And I said, but how can it be? Because this was during the Who is a Jew. Remember the Who is a Jew?
Oh, yeah.
And that's gotten worse and worse and worse. But when it first happened, and we meaning the first International Jewish Feminist Conference happened to be in Jerusalem at the time, and we marched on, I think it was Shamir or Begin, I can't even remember, Begin in 1977. And we said, who is a Jew has to be whoever is a Jew and claims to be a Jew and decides to be part of our people. And somehow or other, American Jews allowed the Rabbanut, the chief rabbis, to define who is a Jew and just sat still for it. After fighting it, what you're saying is we were contentious, yes, but we failed because we caved, just like the mainstream organizations, in my view, have caved on settlements, on annexation, have caved just within the last month by saying, we don't think this is wise, we really don't think this is good for the Jews or good for Israel, and Israel will become a pariah state, and this won't allow 2 states, and this will move to 1 state. But okay, to give this blank check. So there's contentiousness, and then there's progress. And in many cases, contentiousness does not lead to progress. It leads to the victory of regressive forces, because we don't have the same fire in the belly, unfortunately. We end up, forming a firing squad in a circle all too often. And that's where we are right now. The left is eviscerating itself, is eating its own. And it's extremely disturbing to me what's happening to Peter Beinart right now. We can talk about that if anyone wants to do it in the Q&A. But I don't agree with his one-state position, but this is a man who deserves our respect and deserves to have us engage on his feeling that he can no longer defend 2 states because of what's happening on the ground. And that's a serious, very serious contention. And you don't read him out of the tent the way one member of our community has done in a vicious, savage way, calling him like a Holocaust denier. You don't do that when we are a people who really prides ourselves on disputation. The rabbis kept the dissent in. The rabbis did not, which is like the Supreme Court. So you can always go back and you can see that there were 4 people who had a pretty good argument to go the other way on the Supreme Court. 5 didn't, but 4 did, and we're going to hang on to that because there may come a case down the road where that reasoning will be factored in and will be dispositive. The same was true with the Talmud. The minority rabbis were respected, they were yelled at, they had a lot of backing and forthing, but they were not trashed the way it's happening now. And that's what I consider loathsome and reprehensible.
So I think we should start taking questions pretty soon. I hate to end on a low note, but I do think that I was waiting for that, like when you finish a Torah portion, it never ends at a negative. You always have to have something positive. Right. But I think when you say that, to evoke the tradition of principled dissent, but keeping people in the community, I think that's kind of a nice note to end on, even if we. even if we may be falling short.
You have just repackaged it in a very nice ending way.
There you go. And that's what this Ask the Rabbis book is all about too, just to put in for it. You'll like it, I hope. So good. So thank you, Letty. It's such a pleasure. I'm going to turn this over to Suzanne, who will figure out which of the many excellent questions that I've seen bobbing up, how she's going to somehow manage them.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Letty. We want to know, some people would like to know a little bit more about Mrs. America. We know that there are parts of it that are untrue. If you want to share a little bit about some of the bigger scenes in there that just give a false narrative. And also, you have said that you are unhappy with the portrayal of Gloria Steinem, and why is that?
Yeah, I'll start with Gloria, because that hurt me, as if somebody was describing my child or my grandmother or my aunt in a way that I maybe not recognize my own relative, you know? It would be like, who are you portraying here? I don't know Rose Byrne, she's the actress, and I don't know who the director is or why they directed her, as if she had lockjaw and is like, moves sort of in a kind of reptilian way, and you know, is only recognizable by the hair and the glasses and not by anything really that she says. My main argument with the series is that it reduces feminism to a catfight in so many of the key scenes. I will say the best scene, if somebody forced me to say the best scene having to do with Gloria, is when she is in a motel room organizing a bunch of women. They're sitting all around, they're on the floor. And that little kind of mousy woman who's come to kind of respect what she's hearing from feminists. She's a Schlafly person who's sharing a room with a feminist person. And so she hears and witnesses what goes on in a feminist gathering. And there you see the truth, where Gloria doesn't want to be a leader, where she honors everybody's remarks, where everyone speaks in equal time, where nobody defers to the great Duchess the way they do it in all the meetings that you see of the anti-ERA people. And that's a great scene, and that's the only one I can point to and say that reflects what I remember of feminist meetings, okay? Feminist organizing meetings were like that. And this Phyllis Schlafly mole who's in the room, you can see the wonderment in her eyes when she observes this. And you know exactly what's going on in her mind. She's a wonderful actress. Otherwise, you know, they highlight Gloria's couple of sex scenes with her Black boyfriend. You know, she had white boyfriends too, but they chose the Black boyfriend as if to sort of say, oh, she's so radical. She's even dating a Black guy who happened to be Frank Thomas, who happened to be the head of the Ford Foundation. I mean, and you know, you got the feeling that he was some kind of, I don't know, sort of passerby who she met in a bar. So even that was a cheap shot. I felt as if the Equal Rights Amendment itself was given short shrift because it didn't go into the major interest groups that stopped it. It wasn't just Phyllis Schlafly who stopped it and a group of women. It was the insurance agency, the insurance companies who stood to lose a lot if equality is imposed, because they have so many actuarial differences and excuses for this one costing more and this one costing less. And they would have had to correct that. And Schlafly, I mean, she is presented in the body of Kate Blanchett. I mean, there's no more gorgeous person practically on the planet. And Phyllis Schlafly was like a haughty, I was once on the Today Show. We feminists would never go on a program with her because there used to be something called an equal time requirement in the media, where if you had one side, you had to have the other. So if she went on and we wouldn't, she couldn't get on. So we said no, and then she didn't get on. But they got around it by, like, they'd have her in the first segment, and then they'd have somebody like me in the next segment. And I met her in the green room at the Today Show way back when. And there was a moment which I thought, I'm always going to remember this. It's a metaphor for this woman. The front of her was perfect. Everything, you know, the makeup was perfect, the little collars that she wore, the pin here, everything was perfect. The back of her skirt was creased, her bun was like a bird's nest, she was dirty. And I thought, she's a fake. She's somebody who has, you know, 5, 6 children or something, who says proudly, my husband let me come here today. You know, when she's a powerhouse, she's a fire chief. She's someone who travels 320 days a year, and she's telling women to stay home. So there's the front of her, and then there's the truth of her.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to note that I read that the character that you were speaking of earlier, of the woman who was in the room, and Gloria went up to her, that was actually a made-up person. That character was just there for, you know, purposes of the storyline, I guess.
Yeah. They made up a whole lot, so why not make up something good and something true?
Right. So we have mostly all women in the audience today. Not all, but the majority are women. What is the message there, that there are very few men who are interested in showing up to a program like today, for a conversation like this? And does that need to change, and how does it change?
Yes, because it needs to change, and it has been ever thus. As we go around the country speaking, any of us who are feminists with any kind of visibility, the people who come to hear us are women. Men feel somehow they have nothing to learn from women. And that it would be emasculating to be at the foot of a woman dispensing her brand of wisdom, that it would look as if they need help understanding something. All of these things are perceived to be or felt to be emasculating. I've been carrying this exact same banner, Suzanne, in the Jewish community for about 30 years, saying, do not put us in workshops, put us in plenaries. Because men have to come to plenaries, or they do come to plenaries, because they want to see each other. But if you put us in workshops, we're only going to be speaking to each other. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes they ignore it.
Thank you. Do you think that young women today in their 20s and 30s, even teens, see feminism as an issue that they need to galvanize around? And how many young women do you think really understand the history of the ERA and that they should be carrying it on?
I think the young feminists are fantastic now, and they're very comfortable using the word, which a lot of older women still are saying, I'm not a feminist, but, and then they go on and recite every single, bullet point in the feminist agenda, but they're scared to death of the label, because someone told them, feminists hate men, feminists hate families, feminists are all lesbians, feminists are all, wearing overalls or whatever. And unfortunately, older generations have resisted the label. And when you resist a label, you resist solidarity. You resist standing under the umbrella with other women who can then organize around something. You become, a feminist for yourself, let's say. Oh yeah, you're not a feminist, but you're for things that we're for, but you won't work with us, identify with us, sign our petitions, give money to our organizations, show up at our events, but you'd like all the spoils. And, many women do not even know that all the help wanted columns, when I got out of college in 1959, said help wanted female, help wanted male. That meant that with my BA in English American Literature, I could not answer any job except secretary, switchboard operator, receptionist. That is, if I wanted to go into book publishing, which was my goal. That was it. File clerk. There was such a thing. Whereas a man with a BA in English American Literature could go into a senator's office, could work in a think tank, could work for a newspaper, could be an entry level anything in corporate life. But I mean, even if you went into what was an employment agency, they were all along Fifth Avenue around 42nd Street, and they had pink cards and blue cards for the jobs and for the applicants. And you only could be matched pink card, no matter how much you said, I did this for my school newspaper. I ran this campaign and we got such and such done. I know how to work legislatures because I went with a whole group of students and we got thus and such done. No matter. So young people don't realize that's what we came from. Young people, if they've had an abortion, maybe, they went to a very clean place and they had a real doctor. They have no idea what it was like to literally go to a dark alley and in a kitchen with somebody, whose white coat was dirty and you had no sterilization in sight. No idea. But basically, it isn't my place to say, we did this for you. That's really not very likable or useful. So we don't tell younger people what was, and they don't learn it. They scarcely learn about suffrage. And when I learned about suffrage, they showed the most ugly women, and you're a teenager, you don't want to look like that, so you don't identify. You can identify with Gloria Steinem, but you can't identify with Susan B. Anthony. It's hard, unless you really know how brave she was, and what she went through, and how she did it. Or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, chubby with 10 children. They were not presented as role models. They were presented as troublemakers and weirdos. When I speak around the country and somebody doesn't know who Shirley Chisholm was, now you know because of Mrs. America, or didn't know who Fannie Lou Hamer was, without whom there would not have been, a fuss at the 1964 convention about seating the Mississippi Democratic Party. These were heroes, and I'm not going to say heroines because that makes you think of a romance novel. These were real, bona fide heroines, and we're not teaching them to our young people, to our kids and our grandkids, who need to know that, you're in a long line of extraordinarily courageous women. And this is the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. And people keep saying, and women got the right to vote. That's not right. Women won the right to vote. Women fought for the right to vote. Women starved and were force-fed for the right to vote. And any woman who doesn't exercise her franchise is betraying these foremothers. And it's shameful. We mustn't do that. We have to go into the voting booth and say, I'm doing this and you can do it for Henrietta Sold, and you can do it for Jewish women who are in the forefront. And there's plenty of Jewish heroines if that's what you need to galvanize yourself.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, that's so true. We're going to take just one last question because we are actually, it's hard to believe we're already at the hour mark. Now that Virginia in January ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, is there a path towards amending the Constitution?
Well, there is a path, but it's complicated because, as probably everybody knows by now, there was a time element to the passage, and it was extended once, and then it ran out. And so now the Congress would have to approve another extension. And I think that is not going to happen until the election of 2020, when we change the Congress, when we change the Senate, and strengthen our forces in the House. We need a different constituency to get that passed.
And does it matter that, I guess, after all the states that did ratify, that 5 decided they wanted to renege on that? Would that be a
Again,
problem?
that's why you need the extension. You need to revisit those who've reneged, and you need to just open the issue again.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Letty. Thank you, Amy, for this wonderful session, and we really appreciate you taking the time. I want to thank everybody for joining us. If you enjoyed today's...
It's wonderful to see 170 or some odd people, and thank you very much for taking time out of this beautiful day to be with us.
Yes, and I hope that everybody goes to our website and searches for the different articles that Letty has written through the years, some very recently. And if you've enjoyed today's session, we ask that you consider making a donation to Moment so that we can continue programming like this. Again, thank you both, and we will see everybody next time.
Thank you.